We're seeing two different situations inescapably because one of them was a very public criminal investigation. Even though it involved classified information and emails, it was essentially a criminal investigation, so it was handled in a different way, whereas the current investigation that's being looked at involving President Trump and Russia is a counterintelligence investigation that has a criminal aspect to it. So the nature of the investigations is different, and in that way they were unavoidably different. But I think objectively, any person who looks at the way these two things were handled has to say that Mrs. Clinton got the kid gloves treatment, and the Mueller investigation and its predecessor Russian investigation, they're sort of scorching the earth to make a case. The easiest thing for people to lay their eyes on and see is that in the Mueller investigation, what we see is that when you lie to the FBI, you actually get prosecuted, which is the way it works in 99.9% of cases that don't involve Clintons, right? In the Clinton investigation, if you lied to the FBI, it was like Thursday, Basically, what they did was whenever anybody got close to providing incriminating information, they either gave them immunity or they cut a deal with them. They prevented the agents from asking key, obvious questions. And I think the whole thing, the more we look at it, appears to be a situation where what they essentially did was try to stage something that looked like a thoroughgoing investigation, at the end of the rainbow of which was she was going to be exonerated, which was politically very important. Because we want everybody to have the same standard of justice. The rule of law and the reason that we can have ordered liberty in the society is because we believe that the results that come out of the criminal justice system have integrity. And the reason we think they have integrity is because everybody gets treated the same. Every person, whether he's the president or the lowliest person, is supposed to be equal, not only before the bar of justice, but also how they are regarded by the federal and the other police and intelligence agencies. And when we see that, if you're one particular stripe of person, you get one quality of justice, and that everybody else gets a quite different quality of justice, I think that's very alarming to people, and it should be. I don't want to prejudge what Special Counsel Mueller does because he's really not at the end of his investigation, and I must say that for all of the furor around it, if you look at the 3 sets of charges that he's released so far, which involve 4 different people, he has not trumped up, for want of a better word, any kind of a Russia collusion case against, not against the president, not against anyone else. So I think there's a lot of noise around that investigation, and it's to someone like me, it's more important to tell me what he's done, show me the charges. And so far, I think people can take confidence that even if the investigation has been very aggressive, and even though he's gotten a stable of people, which I think is far beyond what you would think one would need to do the investigation he's doing. If you look at the charges he's brought, they're all justifiable and they make sense. I don't think that can be said about the first investigation, where there appears to have been a mountain of evidence, and that they basically contorted themselves to avoid bringing charges, including not prosecuting people who clearly lied to the government, giving immunity to people who should have been squeezed for cooperation, and contorting criminal statutes, really distorting them to avoid applying them as they're written to people like Mrs. Clinton, who seem to have had culpability under them. We have to look at it, and the main reason we have to look at it, not just for the public reputation of how our federal law enforcement agencies conduct themselves, but there's a real strong national security angle to this. And good national security intelligence collection and enforcement is really reliant on the idea that the public can trust the agencies, because so much of it is in this black box of classified information, and so much of it really is about a need to protect sources of information and methods of gathering intelligence, that in many ways, they really have to tell you, trust us. And we have to be able to trust them because they're not just out there trying to make cases, they're actually out there trying to protect the country from people who are trying to do harm to Americans. So it's important that we have some transparency, and it's important that we get our agencies to a point where most Americans, when they say trust us, they think they're worth trusting. With respect to both of these investigations, if they were politically charged, and if people made decisions on the basis of politics, that's not a structural problem, that's a personnel problem. So I want to reserve judgment on it till we get to the end, because I think it's important not to get out in front of what we know. And I'm always trepidatious about this, especially with respect to the Trump part of the investigation, because so much of it really is classified, and there's so much that we don't know, that you don't want to accuse people of wrongdoing, and then something drops out of the classified sky which actually explains what they have done in a sensible way. So my attitude about that is let's see how the facts come out. But with respect to the Clinton investigation, I think that it's clear that the FBI and the Justice Department did not distinguish themselves. It's extraordinarily important because people don't, I think, maybe have a historical enough perspective of this. I'm an older guy now than I was when I started as a prosecutor many years ago, so I still remember what crime was like in this country in the 60s and 70s when I was growing up. And I think a lot of people don't have that historical perspective anymore. So we've had a generation of record low crime. And I think when you assume that as your everyday reality, you forget how hard it was to get to that point, how we had to go from high crime to what we have now. And really that was on the basis of, number one, superb performance by our law enforcement and to some extent our intelligence agencies, but also our ability to trust them that they were doing what we need them to do. And we can't, as you see the prosperity that we have in the country, we've had record prosperity at the same time we've had record low crime. They go hand in hand. So when the enforcement piece of it breaks down, you have to worry about the prosperity piece of it breaking down. So it's extraordinarily important. Of course, the most important thing on the enforcement side and with respect to Special Counsel Mueller is let's see what charges we see. I think that they've now been investigating the Russian collusion angle of this for about 2 years. And from everything we can tell, at least publicly, and there's been a lot of leaking, so we know a lot more probably than we should, it sure looks to me like whatever they may have in terms of troubling stuff about President Trump or his campaign, it certainly doesn't rise to the level of a conspiracy to commit espionage or some other actionable offense. And I think because of the importance of or the detriment to the country of a situation where the president tries to govern with a cloud over his head, I think at the very least, if that's a dry hole, if they don't have a collusion case, they ought to come out and say, we don't have a collusion case. That doesn't preclude them from continuing to look at obstruction. I personally don't think legally what we have here comes close to obstruction, but I could be wrong, right? So there's no reason why that thread can't be continued. But this whole idea of having a president for over a year govern with a suggestion out there that he was involved in a sinister, corrupt conspiracy with an adversary regime, if that cloud can be lifted, it ought to be lifted. It's better it's not for President Trump, it's better for the country.